Thank you, Aaron, and thank you all for joining us here tonight at St. John's. We'll hear from both Beth Macy and John Bassett, who have both graciously agreed to stay for questions and to sign books after the talk. Note cards have been placed in every seat, at least the first 200 we placed before we filled in the rest of the room. Ushers will collect those questions in baskets at the break just before the Q&A starts. At this point, I'd like to welcome John Bassett III to St. John's. We're looking forward to hearing from you tonight, sir. I'd also particularly like to welcome any folks who are here from Henry County, Bassett, and Galax. I think you all share the spotlight in this as well. I could tell you about all of the amazing awards that Beth Macy has won for her writing. Hello, Neiman Fellow. But the real mark of her gift as a journalist shines in a simple question. How many of you remember a specific Beth Macy story? By a show of hands, how many of you remember young Selena, who made it to Harvard with the whole community of Gainsborough Library patrons cheering her on? Or Beth's award-winning stories about the Somali Bantu refugees that were coming to live in our community, where the children were going to bus stops where 12 languages were spoken. Or her series about teen mothers. Or how families were navigating caregiving for their elderly loved ones. Or maybe what comes to mind is one of her front burner food columns that you printed out, now covered in grease stains, but printed with precious ink that instructs you maybe how to make Eric Woodrum's sag paneer. This is from 2005. Y'all remember FOB's, Friends of Bill? I bet here with us tonight we have a lot of IBBs, interviewed by Beth. And we were lucky because we knew that our story would be in good hands. Beth has lived in Roanoke since 1989, where she met her beloved husband, Tom Landon, and now has her two children, Will and Max. She worked for the Roanoke Times, telling stories about us that have helped us know each other better than we know ourselves. You know that journalists are supposed to be objective, but Beth credits fellow journalist Mary Bishop, who I think is here tonight. Beth credits her with telling her it's okay to care about the people you're interviewing, and it's okay to care about their story. Factory Man isn't a religious book, but it's rife with stories that resonate in this church setting. Stories about doing the right thing regardless of the cost. Stories about real human beings and their all too human frailties. And when they did and didn't treat each other with grace and humility. Yes, this book is about who's related to whom and big industry and 1930s trade tariffs. But most of all, this book is about what it means to live in community. So please join me in welcoming Beth Macy.
Thank you. Wow. No, I'm like already tearing up. That's not good for you. So I'm going to read 3 passages, and I'm going to read a little from the beginning, and then I'm going to read a little from the end, and then I'm going to read a little from the middle, which is weird, but it's a good entree to then introducing you to John. And I'm going to start with chapter 1, which is the tip-off. There's a prologue that precedes it, and it's about this kind of watershed moment in 2002 when John and his son Wyatt went to Dalian, China to find who was making this cheap chest of drawers that was threatening to bring his whole industry down. And he wanted to get eyeball to eyeball with the guy who was making it because he was thinking about filing what at the time, what would then become the world's largest anti-dumping petition. And so that comes before this part, and this is where I'm telling you how I found the story. And it's sort of laying out all the threads of the book. I was really driven initially by the question of what happened to all those people in Martinsville and Henry County who lost all their jobs. Half of the workforce was displaced, almost 20,000 people. And where did they go? What happened to them? And the second driving question was really, was there another way? Was there another way it could have been done? And so a friend of mine who was visiting last week, who helped me a lot with the book, her name's Andrea Pitzer. She lives in Washington, D.C., and she said, your book is doing so great. It's just wonderful. She said, you found this amazing story that goes all the way to China and back. And the guy's still alive. She goes, you know how lucky you are? It's like living history. So, okay, I'm going to read. Once in a reporter's career, if one is very lucky, a person like John Bassett III comes along. JB3 is inspirational. He's brash. He's a sawdust-covered good old boy from rural Virginia, a larger-than-life rule breaker who for more than a decade has stood almost single-handedly against the outflow of furniture jobs from America. Quote, he's an asshole. I made sure it was okay with Christy to say that at church. More than one of his competitors said that when they heard I was writing a book about globalization using him as the main character. Over the course of researching this book, over the course of hearing his many lectures and listening to him evade my questions by telling me the same stories over and over, there were times when I agreed. I first heard about him in Rocky Mount, Virginia, about half an hour from my home in Roanoke, while eating breakfast with my neighbor and good friend, Joel Shepard. Joel owns Virginia Furniture Market, a Rocky Mount retail establishment that began thriving at the same time the import boom hit. Right now, as I type, I'm sitting in a Paisley recliner that my husband and I still fight over because it's the comfiest seat in our 1926 American Foursquare. I remember Joel showing it to me in his store, rocking it back and forth. Despite what I might have heard about made-in-China furniture, he told me, a swarm of high school wrestlers could pin one another on this chair and it would not fall apart. With a friendly neighbor discount, I got it for $160. I'd invited Joel to breakfast to pick his brain. I was working on a Roanoke Times series on the impact of globalization on Southwest Virginia's company towns, articles that were inspired by the work of freelance photographer Jared Soares, who'd been making the hour-long trek from Roanoke to Martinsville 3 times a week for more than a year. Jared's photos were gritty and moving. Church services and tattoo artists, a textile plant conveyor belt converted for use in a food pantry, a disabled minister named Leonard whiling away the time in his kitchen in the middle of the afternoon. The people of Martinsville and Henry County were refreshingly open about what had happened to them. And Jared had long wondered why our paper didn't do more to document the effects of globalization in our mountainous corner of the world. Not that many other media outlets had done any better. According to a 2009 Pew Research Center survey, the gravest economic crisis since the Great Depression was largely being covered from the top down, primarily from the perspective of big business in the Obama administration. The percentage of economy stories that featured real ordinary people and displaced workers, just 2%. If the people of Henry County wanted their stories to be heard, Jared and I were going to have to help. It would be up to writers and photographers like us to paint the long view picture of what had happened when one after another, first the textile and then the furniture factories closed and set up shop in Mexico, China, and Vietnam, where workers were paid a fraction of what the American laborers were earning. In the Henry County region alone, some 20,000 people had lost their jobs. In the early 60s, Martinsville was Virginia's manufacturing powerhouse, known for being home to more millionaires per capita than anywhere else in the country. But by 2009, 1/5 of the town's labor force was unemployed, and many of the millionaires had fled for cheerier landscapes. Henry County was now the capital of long-term unemployment, with Virginia's highest rate for 9 of the past 11 years. A week before breakfast with Joel, an empty Bassett Furniture plant had burned to the ground. Police arrested Silas Crane, a 34-year-old Henry